Hello and welcome back to the series of tutorials for PCG. And in this case, we're entering chapter 3, and chapter 3 is very specific. We are going to build blueprints with PCG components, which means we are actually using PCG, but we're also building blueprints that are specifically working for within the PCG. And that way we can also access more additional functionalities, which then can be implemented to our PCG graph later. So that helps to develop an extra and deeper knowledge on the not only technical side of things, but also how PCG can work, but at the same time have ability to do much more flexible functionalities, such as changing the position of each point generated on the scene, but also we can evaluate more info to express extra different mechanics that comes with the PCG structure. So in this case, what we're gonna do first is to create first basic components. So in this case, what I'm gonna do is create the PCG graph to start off with. So right click, and also before I start, make sure the landscape is generated, but at the same time, always keep in mind to enable your PCG framework inside the plugins folder. To begin with, let's right click and search for PCG graph. Name this PCG generator, and then let's open this up. To begin with, we're gonna keep it very simple because we are not going to use PCG graph yet, but let's at least add some of the components we actually need for this exercise to start off with. So in this case, what I'm gonna do is right click, search for surface sampler, and then let's add two more, as well as a new one, which is going to be called execute blueprint. So this is the important one because this is what actually we're gonna be creating our own custom-made blueprint for this to work. So in this case, I'm just leave it as a placeholder, and then later what we're going to do, once we create our PCG blueprint, we're gonna literally hook this up and find it here on the list. But to start off with, we can keep it as it is. Let's just make sure that we kind of make it nice and clean on the scene. Okay, perfect. So let's just save it. Let's go back and then start adding more. So this is what we're gonna do. We create now a PCG blueprint. So right click and search for blueprint section. And if you go on the classes here, just type in blueprint element. Make sure you find this PCG blueprint element. Click, and then let's rename this. Technically what's going to do is generate the points based on our blueprint. So let's open this up. Let's start adding our functionalities within. To begin with, let's just dive in a bit more and exactly explain what exactly each section of this is doing. So in this chapter, what we're gonna do is actually we are going to use the functions that comes as overridden functions, and you can actually very easily generate them. Because in this situation, what we're trying to do is to make sure we are distributing points and utilizing the points that we're then going to modify within the PCG data collection. But because for this to do it, we have to actually use the point loop body function. So if you click on this and look for point loop function and add this, and also what we're gonna also do next is we're going to create execute with context. So if you click on this, you're gonna basically start off with what we have here as an executive context. So now let's go and start adding these values inside it, as well as the variables. To begin with, what we need to do is first execute context. That means we need to drag it with context in order to access it. In this case, what we're gonna do is to promote the variable. And of course, leave it as it is, that's fine, but make sure you connect it to execute pin. And now what the next bit is to also trying to access the input through breaking the PCG data collection. In other words, we need to access the PCG data collection that we are trying to then later able to tag this data to make sure it works with the meshes that we're going to spawn. So in this case, what I'm going to do is drag it out, look for break PCG data collection. And in this situation, what we're gonna do is to try to for loop this entire structure, because we're gonna shuffle through every point in the PCG later. So in this case, I'm gonna do is drag it out and look for each loop. And I'm going to connect this together just like that. And the next step is to basically into more integration to make sure our data is being tagged every time we generate PCG points. So in this case, what I'm going to do, let me just move this out of the way. Now let's start and look for this PCG tag data. So in this case, I'm going to first break the PCG tag data. And I'm also going to cast it to our spatial data. But we need to cast it from PCG data. So let's go and search for cast to PCG data, spatial data. And with this selected, let me just loop this together. Let me move this out of the way slightly. Okay, cool. So, and next thing is also we need to try and point this data with the context. We are reaching out from the executed context, and we were trying to spell it out through that spatial data, PCG spatial data library that we have here. So in this case, what I'm going to do is search for to point data with context. And because we're using the context, we can literally do is use that to create a variable, put it here, and then connect it to our context. So now what we're going to do is, because we're going to point loop this data later with our flow control just created. So we're actually going to create a point loop here as well. So flow control, connect this, and we can then carry on and then connect our context to our context here, because we're only relying on this context here. So if we just create more extra nodes, double click on the line here, and then we can just connect this all together into one structure here. And then as we carry on, we also trying to make sure that every time we process it through the point loop data, and anything comes out of anything, let's say something's not working, we only trying to also return the node. So in this case, what I'm going to do is when it cast the fail, I want it to return to the node. So in this case, I'm just going to plug return node to cast fail here. So another thing I'm going to also do is this time, because we already broke this PCG data, now we can, this whole operation that we accessing the every points within the point loop, we're actually going to return this as to make PCG data. So in other words, we made it, we broke it, but then we want to make it again. So in this case, what I'm going to do is go and make PCG data. I want to then use this make PCG data and turn it into an array. And of course, because we turn it into an array, we also want to know what data we're tagging. So in this case, what I'm going to do is that array that is going to access through it, it's also going to be tagged to the specific data. So in this case, I'm going to drag it out and search for promote variable. And so I'm going to call this array tag data, just like the name suggests itself. Perfect. And then I'm going to connect this all together into one form. So the next bit is done. However, there are some things that still needs to be also accessed, and also we also trying to, in this case, what we have already done here, we broke this our PCG data collection. We shuffled through every step to get into our PCG data through tagged process of its spatial data. And then in this case, we're going to end it up to make the PCG data collection. Because we broke it, now we're going to make this at the end. So in this case, this is the final step, which I'm going to do it. So what I'm going to do is that then make the PCG data collection. And I'm going to plug this to return node. So if I copy this, and I'm going to connect this together with this, and then connect it together with this one node here. So that should be nice and done. Perfect. So this is pretty much what you should be getting for the execute with context. So the next step, I think the most important would be, is to go from point loop body, which we already created at the beginning. So double click. So now we're here, and that's just the main bit of the meat where we're gonna construct the point data and what it's going to do with this data once we accessing through the executed context. So in this case, what we're gonna do, we're actually going to form some structure to make sure we have ability to play with the, in this case, the data that is going to be shuffled through each point. So in this case, I'm going to do is in point, search for its set members in PCG point. This is where we're going to access each PCG point. And for now, let's just connect this to our point out here. Always make sure we return the value, because otherwise it's not going to work for our here structure, especially when it comes to PCGP component. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to add some variables. So in this case, I'm going to add three the vectors. And the vectors I'm going to use them are going to be for random positions, random vectors, for random position, random rotation, as well as random scale. That's good. So we have all these vectors available, but what we need to do is to make them public so they are visible on the later. And next thing is we are going to then use them to manipulate with our point data. So in this case, I'm going to go and break the PCG point. And we are going to access this break PCG point here. So I'm going to do is then go to our properties, under details pane, go to properties tab here. And we are going to disable some of them which we don't need. So in this case, I'm going to disable those. So now, as you may see, we only have a transform. Okay. And I'm going to do is then break this transform into three components. So let's go and break the transform. And I'm going to have location, rotation, and scale. So they're all going to be working separately. So let's start with random position. Drag it in and get random. And I'm going to do is then add the multiplier operator. And I'm going to connect it all together. So let's just disable here and connect it here. And I'm going to add this to location. And I'm going to do is then make the transform. So I'm going to move this slightly this way. So I'm going to put more space there. And then what we're going to do is then we're going to make the transform. Since we broke it, then we're going to turn back to transform. And in this case, what I'm going to do is with this selected, I'm going to add the property for transform. So in this case, with the set members in PCG point, I'm going to transform this. And I'm going to make a bit more space so that everyone can have access there to it. And I'm going to plug this into so that it follows the chain of entire node structure here. So with this whole setup, now we can also start using for rotation here. So in this case, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make it a bit different this time. So we're not going to follow what we have here, but I'm going to do it separately. So I'm going to, for the rotation, I'm going to split the struct. And I'm going to basically do a randomization here. So every time we change some rotation, it will randomly change their rotation according to their sit position and the points in space. So I'm going to drag it out and get a random rotation here. I'm going to look for multiply operator. And I'm also going to use the float. In this case, I'm going to turn this to float. In this case, what I'm going to do is to right click and look for random float. And I'm going to randomize it by float in range. So I'm going to random float in range. So I'm going to connect to the same minimum as well as maximum. So that gives you a bit different variety to this. And I'm going to plug this in. And then with this whole setup, I'm going to then break it into a vector. So I'm going to break this again, but into, and I'm going to use X and Y positions here. So I'm going to set this to X and Y. I'm going to move this slightly there. So this gives me extra space. And then what we're actually going to do is do the same thing what we've done here, but this time I'm going to basically use just the vector. I don't want to break it into struct. I'm going to use the same formation like here. So I'm going to copy this and duplicate it. But with this node here, variable, I'm going to replace to scale. So I'm going to set it to scale. And there you go. And I can just move them slightly so that at least they're cleaner. Okay, so this is pretty much what the should look like currently for our graph. So with all the setup, what we have just accomplished, we're ready to carry on to the next stages here. So I'm going to then create an actor blueprint. So I'm going to compile this and go and right click in our again PCG folder here. So I'm going to create an actor. So in this case, I'm going to call BP mesh generator. And I'm going to double click and I'm actually started to add things in there. So, so let me just have a look. Okay, so to begin with, I'm going to start adding variables, the ones that we have created like in the PCG blueprint there. But in this case, I'm going to use them here too. and I'm going to make them public. Next bit is I'm going to use a box collision to then resize the entire PCG graph. And also we're actually going to set this to something bigger so it doesn't seem to be too small. 200,000 and get 100. So a little bit more volume space. Another thing I'm going to do is also add PCG component to this, our blueprint here. So now let's go and actually add our PCG that we have created. So in this case, it's going to be PCG generator. I'm going to make this way. So with the PCG generator selected, I'm going to just drag it into this. Perfect. I got to carry on and compile this, and I'm going to bring it into our mesh generator right here. Nothing's doing because we still have to work on our PCG graph. That's what we're going to do it now. So what we're going to do is to now start setting up our PCG graph. So in this case, I'm going to go back to our PCG graph. Let me just move this slightly so this is cleaner. And then we can start shuffling in. So first things first, once we are on PCG graph, let's actually create 3 nodes that we're gonna connect these nodes to our main actor blueprint. So in this case, what I'm gonna do is go right click and search for get actor property, and let's duplicate it twice. So there we got them. And we gotta put some names there, but also we are trying to add get actor data, and this one will be useful to access the data of the actor that we're using on the scene here. So this is the one that we need for that. So we can move this input out of the way because we're only going to use get actor. And for this one, we are actually going to name these property names. So let's go and check those ones. So let's just call them a random position. And that's going to be the same random rotation, and then random scale. And also just for the information, I also do this because you may also use attribute name for that, but we don't need to, but I always do that. It's just for its convenience. So I'm going to also do this for the attribute name. And as we go on, let's try to work the rest of it. So in this case, I'm gonna actually use the input, and I'm actually going to connect this our surface sampler here, and then I'm going to connect them respectively. So in this case, I'm going to be this random position, random rotation, random scale. Okay, awesome. And I'm going to do the same. Let's just okay, perfect. So for starters, let's also before we come in and jump in, let's also add one array here. And for this one, I added landscape. So if you go and add this, let's show you how this. So if you are on that bit of an input, what you need to do is to set this to landscape as it goes. So it's now it's fine and then set up. So if you open this up, then you can now connect to the surface. So just go compile this with this one to go. Now, when you have this available, also another thing I'll also show you is that for static mesh spawner, I have this rock that I've downloaded from the Quixel Megascan. You don't have to, you can use the one from the books example, but you can also download it whatever you want. But for this one, it's just I'm using this just to show you how to work with PCG. So in this case, I'm going go back again. And then here, I set this up to work for this rock. As you see, I just set it up just right now there. I just added one array. I've added, and then now we can go and test this out. So if I started playing around with that, I'm going first set it to something very secure, and then I'm going to add these values there. And I think because we need to make it slightly bigger, okay, let's have a look once more. Yeah, there you go. That's better. So as you can see, as way too much, I can also adjust your sizes you can also adjust your rotation and can randomly play around within between this within this two ranges, and of course set this position however you want to. And as you may see, the bigger the values, the more spread they become. So, but anyway, the whole point of this, it's a very cool experiment for you to try to challenge yourself when you have something like this to create your, in this instance, we're dealing with this with PCG Blueprints. And of course, it gives you like very cool effects when you know how to sort this out and how to create your own PCG Blueprint. Thank you so much for going through this chapter with me. Of course, in the next chapter, we're gonna dive in more into optimizing and developing extra features to enhance this PCG Blueprint. So thank you guys. I see you guys in the next chapter.